Welcome to Parenting GPS, navigating your parenting journey. I'm Kari Kling, the host of your show. As parents, we want to show our kids how much we love them, how much we care for them, and we want to protect them. It's only a natural feeling. But what happens if we protect them a little too much? What happens when we overparent and rescue them? We just swoop in and rescue them anytime we think something's going to happen and they may experience failure. Well, the next guest, our guest for today, Jessica Lahey, talks about this in her book, The Gift of Failure. And she says, you know what? When we do this, we may be robbing of our children of the greatest lessons of our lives. And so what I'd like to do right now is introduce our guest, Jessica Lahey, to you. And I don't want to miss anything, so I'm going to read her bio for you. Jessica Lahey is the author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Gift of Failure: How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children Can Succeed, and The Addiction Inoculation: Raising Healthy Kids in a Culture of Dependence. For over 20 years, Jess has taught every grade from 6th to 12th grades in both public and private schools, and spent 5 years teaching in an alcohol rehab for adolescents in Vermont, and serves as a prevention and recovery coach. She has written about parenting, education, and child welfare for the Washington Post, The Atlantic, and her bi-weekly column, The Parent-Teacher Conference, ran for 3 years at the New York Times. She designed and wrote curriculum for the Amazon Kids award-winning animated series, The Stinky and Dirty Show, and was a 2019 Pushcart Prize nominee. Jess holds the dubious honor of having written an article that was later adapted as a writing prompt for the 2018 SAT test. She hosts the #AmWriting podcast from her empty nest in Vermont. Please help me welcome Jessica Lahey to the show. Jessica, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure. And, I have to just tell you that I did not find your book when it first came out a few years ago. A friend of mine actually recommended it to me about 3 years ago and said, "What do you think about this book?" And I said, I can't believe I don't know about this book. And it has become one of my all-time most favorite parenting books. And I want you to know it is the book that I probably recommend most in my parent coaching sessions with parents that I work with one-on-one. So thank you.
Thank you. No, I'm so thrilled. That's what I always wanted, was a book with a long tail, and, being out there and getting people talking about it and keeping it sort of on the shelves in schools. That's been, one of the great joys of my life. I get to do a lot of speaking out there on the road, and it makes me really, really happy.
Well, hopefully more people will learn about this from this show, and we'll keep you even busier. And it's not just for parents, but grandparents, educators, administrators, anybody who works with children. And before we just dive into the book, Jess, could I ask you to please just share with our viewers, how did this book come to be? What was transpiring in your own life with your own children and your students when you were teaching that made you think, there's a problem here?
I was teaching middle school. I was having the time of my life. Middle school really is where my heart lies. I just love teaching middle school. Increasingly, though, I was noticing that the parents of my students were interfering in such a way that it was sort of it was making it so that I was losing a lot of teaching opportunities with the kids. As many of us, especially teachers and especially middle school teachers, know, you can't just teach something the second something happens. You have to wait for a really good teaching moment. You have to wait till the kid is sort of calm and willing to listen and all that sort of stuff. And increasingly, those moments were being stolen away, either because the parent was interfering in such a way that they were sweeping away any potential for consequences, or they were doing the work for the kid, or showing up at school and delivering items that, that were sort of, making an end run around the teachable moments. And as upset as I was getting with the parents of my students, I had to realize that I was doing the same thing to my own kids. I had a kid in middle school and I had a kid in, I think at that point, fourth grade, third or fourth grade. And I was doing the same thing to my own kids. I realized I had a 9-year-old kid at the time who couldn't tie her own shoes. And yeah, that I was sort of slapped in the face with that whole, you can't cast aspersions, you can't throw stones at those people because, yeah, you're doing it the same thing yourself. Glass
Yeah.
houses and all that.
And when you're in it, even though we're both educators and moms, when you're in it, and we know better, but when we're in
Right.
it, it's sometimes difficult to see the forest from the trees,
Yeah.
as they say. So many parents just are reluctant to tell their children no, because they
Mhm.
feel like they're being mean, or they want to be their friend.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What advice or what suggestions or just thoughts do you have about, as parents, we have to set boundaries and we have to be consistent with them,
Mhm.
and saying no is part of being a parent. What are your thoughts about that?
With both the gift of failure content and the content around substance use prevention, I'm constantly having to remind myself that this is a long game. This whole parenting thing is a long game. And every time I get stuck in this emergency or this thing right now has to be perfect, I find that I'm really undermining both my own best, sort of my own best interest and my kids' best interest. So every single time I want to react because of whatever happening in the moment, I have to step back and say, hold on a second. Do I want my kid to be able to do this perfectly now, or do I want them to be able to do it themselves next time? Or, yeah, it might feel really good for me to say yes to my kid in this moment or to step in and intervene and do for my kid in this moment. But where do I want my kid to be 6 months from now, or, 2 years from now, or 10 years from now? And that sort of long game has to be at the forefront of my mind often because it's so tempting to step in and want to do for my kids. I hate seeing my kids frustrated. I hate seeing my kids feel stupid. And yet here we are. Sometimes that's how we learn best.
I couldn't agree with you more. And we're going to talk about this more as the show continues. But I think what I really want parents to understand is it doesn't mean that we have to be mean about, well, I'm not doing that for you.
Right.
It could be very, I encourage parents that I work with, stay neutral, stay
Mhm.
calm and say, well, I'm sorry that that didn't work out for you, but how can we problem solve this? And always try to put it back. Even, preschool, kindergarten kids,
Mhm.
2-year olds can figure out how to be their own problem solvers.
Yeah, and the way we do that is by keeping our emphasis on the process and less on the end product. If we're focusing constantly on the process of learning, of becoming, our kids will, number one, they'll believe us more when we say, what I really care about is that you learn something from this, but
Right.
it also diffuses their anxiety. And I'm seeing more and more kids who are just so trapped in their own sense of, I must be perfect all the time, that if we're able to focus more on the process and less on the product, we can diffuse that. We can get them out of that cycle of just sort of revving themselves up and essentially often getting stuck in their own sense of, I can't finish this, I can't start this unless it's perfect. So that process over product thing is really important for me also as sort of a daily mantra.
And I think it's a mantra for all of us. One of the things, we're going to take a break in just a minute or so, but one of the things that I share with parents, and I try to do with my own boys who are now juniors, they're twins, they're juniors in college, is I try to think of, and I try to encourage other parents, think of senior year of high school as their freshman practice year.
Yeah.
So they're pretty much doing things on their own and figuring it out, but you're there to help, correct them and get them pointed in the right direction before they go. And so think of each year as, from elementary school, what's another thing that they can do on their own? What's another thing that they can do on their own? And it's just like riding a bicycle. Nobody gets up on a bicycle, well, at least I never did, the first time, and just ride it. You have to practice it. And that's the part I think that is a really great a thing that you point out
Mhm.
about, kids need to have the process. So here's what we're
Absolutely.
going to do. We're going to really delve into your book, and we're going to give some parents some practical strategies that they can start doing the minute they see this. And then we have some questions at the end of our show from our viewers. So we'll be
Great.
right back. Thank you. And we're back. In the first segment, Jess, we started to talk about how important it is for children to become their own problem solvers, and that we as parents don't just race in and, fix it for them. I want to go into more depth about that, but first I want to read a quote from your book because I think it sums it up so well. And then I'd like to ask you to respond to it, please. Your quote talks about that we as parents have to be okay to watch our children fail. It doesn't mean we like it. It doesn't mean we feel great about it. It's still difficult. But here's your quote. Failure is too often characterized as a negative, but it's the disappointments, rejections, corrections, and criticisms that are all opportunities in disguise. I love that. Would you please expand on that for our viewers?
Well, actually, I have an analogy to explain that one. So one of the biggest failures in my career actually was the first draft of The Gift of Failure. It was horrible. It was terrible. My editor, who I love her so much, she was really nice about it, but also she had to share with me that the book in that form was unpublishable. And they wanted to hire someone to come in and help me with the writing and the organization in particular. And so I begged her to let me have 2 probationary chapters. I said, if we can do this, if you tell me everything that's wrong with this book, and I'll try not to throw up while you're telling me all of this criticism. And so I filled a notebook. We had a really long meeting. I filled a notebook, and I essentially learned how to write a book from her. And all of the things that I learned, in 2 chapters became 4, which became the whole book. The biggest success of my entire adult career wasn't when I hit the New York Times bestseller list. It was when I turned in the rough draft of the addiction inoculation, and my editor came back to me and she said, there's like hardly any edits on this. You just, and what I had done literally was take all of her criticisms, all of her feedback, all of her constructive, feedback for me, and essentially made checklists so that I wouldn't make the same mistakes again. And I learned how to write a book from her. And so my kids, for example, know that the biggest success, the thing I'm proudest of as a writer isn't necessarily the awards and stuff like that. It's, my rough draft of my second book being really clean, because that I had to really put my big girl pants on and grow up a little bit, because there were times I wanted to crawl up and just crawl into a ball and just give up. But, the fact that I shared all of that with my kids means that my kids understand what can come from taking that feedback and using it in a constructive way, as opposed to just freaking out and saying, no, I can't hear any negative feedback. So it's that kind of stuff that really makes us who we are.
Absolutely. And the fact that you gave a real life example, so many children, and most of us know this because we remember when we were kids, we look at the adults in our lives and we think they have it all together. They know everything. They don't do anything, incorrectly. And of course, nothing could be farther from the truth. In fact, I had a parent coaching session a few days ago with a man who's got a little boy who's almost 3. And he said, my 3-year-old, he gets upset if he doesn't do anything correctly. And I said, you know what? It's important to model for him. Oh, look, I did this. I should have done it this way. It would have worked better for me. I just learned something. So parents modeling for their children is so important. And
we're their first best teachers, and we have these incredible opportunities to share information with our kids about how we screwed up. And even, this is crazy, I know, but even ask your kids for feedback on like, how do you think that I could do this better? I hit reply all instead of reply on an email, and now all these people at work are mad at me. What do you think I could do? That helps build kids' empathy. It helps build your kids' ability to perspective take and get into other people's shoes. It helps them with their problem solving, and it helps them see that when we get when we do something wrong, that it's an opportunity to learn how to do better next time. So yeah, modeling this stuff is incredibly important.
Incredibly important. And that brings me to my next question. Sometimes when I begin talking with parents, and this goes back to the days that I was teaching before I was even doing parent coaching or before I
Mhm.
was a parent myself, people think that, oh, you just throw your kids to the wolves, you just let them fail. And no, it's about showing your love and your support and helping them get the supplies that they need for whatever they're doing, and modeling, as we just talked about. And so could you share a little bit about those strategies? How, if a parent hasn't begun to try to do this modeling for their children and to help them become more autonomous,
Mhm.
what would you suggest that they begin with?
Well, I one of the places it's always starts with sort of our mindset about this. And our mindset is that process over product, process over end product, parenting for the long term instead of in these everyday emergencies. And also remembering that the research is really, really clear that kids who don't know how to be frustrated, that just can't cope with being frustrated, learn a lot less at school. As a teacher, I would always rather have a perfectly average kid who can be frustrated and rely on themselves to do some problem solving, as opposed to having a super wildly gifted kid who just falls apart the second they become frustrated. Because in that ability to sit with their frustration and learn how to rely on themselves, learn how to read the instructions again, learn how to skip that problem and come back to it. All of these, this is what helps kids learn best in and out of school.
Absolutely. I again, I couldn't agree with you more. And one of the things that you made me think about when you were talking about this, going back to my teaching days, I'm sure your teaching days, I used to encourage the parents on parent night and in newsletters, said, please don't bail your child out. If there's a project due and the night before they come to you and say, 8 o'clock at night, I need poster board, or I need whatever, just say, I'm so sorry, but this is the thing right here is called a planner, and
Mhm.
this is what we had talked about. So you want to set the kids up for success. But
Mhm.
I used to tell my kids, if you need to go to the store to buy things for your project or whatever the situation is, I'm happy to take you, but I'm not going to ask you, do you want to go now? I'm going to wait for you to say, oh, I need to get, the materials for what I'm doing. And so we want to make them more responsible. We want to give them that feeling of success, and then to follow it up with, wow, you must be so proud of yourself because you used time management, you used your planning skills to help remember, blah, blah, blah.
Well,
So
and I think it's really, really important to superimpose on top of that. And I'm with you all the way. But we also have to remember that the brain develops from the bottom up. And so
yep,
the younger a kid is, the less ability they're going to have to do what's called it's umbrella skills of executive function.
executive
And
function.
time management is one,
Right,
and resource management
right.
is one, and that kind of thing. So from a very early age, you want to give them developmentally appropriate ways to be as responsible for their time and their stuff and
Right.
their, planning as possible. So for a really, really little kid, that might mean, we put a calendar on the wall and we have, the science fair is on this day and we put X's on the days leading
Right.
up to the science fair. For an older kid, it might mean that we're setting alarms for our online calendars, and not alarms for the day it's due, but an alarm 4 days out saying, here's an alarm 4 days out. Have you purchased the poster board yet for that project? An alarm 2 days out saying, where are you with that project? So helping kids be their own, strategize for themselves. And sometimes parents are going to want to come up with all the strategies for their kids. But remember, the strategies that your kids come up with on their own are going to be the ones that they have the most investment in and are most likely to work for them in a way, far better than our strategies will ever work for them.
100%. I agree with you. And it's about what we just talked about, the modeling, the
Mhm.
support, the love, the guidance, but trying not to do it for them.
Yeah, in schools, as a teacher, we call it scaffolding. We
Right.
like kids to have that scaffolding underneath them so that, if they fall, they'll only fall so far. But it's also a matter of remembering that that scaffolding that we set up for them has to be taken away at some point. They
Right.
can't go off to college with, propped up by all of our scaffolding. We've got to help them function on their own ahead of time. So it's a matter of, or you even using your training wheels analogy, training wheels have a little nut in them so that you can raise the training wheels as they get stronger and more confident. And eventually the goal is not to have them be in training wheels forever, but to have them go higher and higher. And then we take them away once they've gotten to the point where they can handle the tippiness of the bike. That's our goal, is to be those training wheels that are there so they don't crash, but so they get a little bit of the tipping, because that's how they learn and that's how they become stronger.
Beautifully said. I love the analogy. And when we come back for segment 3, we're going to continue to give parents ideas, strategies, content about what they can do. We'll be right back. And we're back. We've been talking about allowing our children to be invested in their decision-making process, and maybe to deal with the consequences of, oh, that didn't happen, but how can we learn from it? And I want to take this conversation right now, Jess, and kind of direct it towards school and learning, grades and learning, which we know are really two different things. Some parents think it's the same, but just because someone gets an A in something doesn't mean they really understand it at the level of application. And so we can have these wonderful, concepts about, letting our children fail, and then they get to school, and, the competition, the pressure, the grades raise their ugly head, and then the anxiety kicks in and all of that. What suggestions do you have for parents when it comes to this idea, especially in a middle school or a high school where it counts more than elementary school, really high school? What are your thoughts for parents about learning and grades?
So by the time middle school comes around, number one, your kid should be the main conduit of information between home and school. And increasingly, schools are rolling out these parent portals where parents can log on and check their kids' grades, 24/7. Some places you can even see like what your kid ate for lunch. It's crazy what is available on the portal. And increasingly, it's also becoming the default. So in
Mhm.
order to put in your emergency information, you have to log on to the portal. I'm very proud to say I've only logged on once to the portal, and it was because they made me in order to put the information in the computer. But the portal, again, is another place where parents can get really overwrought and focused on the end product as opposed to the process. So once grades and points and scores, and then the SAT and the ACT and all that sort of stuff are starting to really dominate, it's going to be even more important for us to focus more on the process and less on the product. And it's something as a teacher I do with my students, and something I have to do with the parents as well. When the parents come to parent teacher conference and they want to get hung up on the difference between a 91 and an 89, I
Right.
still have to bring it back to the learning, the shared, between the two of us, the shared interest is how much a kid learns. And so let's talk about what your kid has learned and what your kid hasn't learned and how we can get them there. Increasingly, there are school districts that are realizing how much more important the learning is than the grades. And the performative part of trying to get all A's, that kind of thing. And so are moving in a direction of something called standards-based grading, where, kids have to master skills as opposed to, being able to regurgitate just, whatever the teachers downloaded to the kids. So there's lots of ways that I think schools are really changing to reflect the fact that learning should be the end goal and not necessarily an A. And hopefully colleges and their admission processes are going to catch up with that as well. And we're seeing a lot of schools start to abandon, ACTs and SATs as a marker of, of achievement. So anyway, I think there's a lot of ways we can do that, but it really all comes back to what we're focused on is the learning and less so the end result. What we're focused on is the process and not less so on the grade. If your kid comes home with a high grade or a low grade, you can actually treat those similarly in the sense that your feedback should be, Interesting. So how did you get that grade? What did you do to get that grade? If it's a high grade, what are you going to repeat for next time so that you can repeat this experience? Or if it was a low grade, what did you do that maybe you should leave behind that's clearly not working for you? Oh, you say your friend got an A and you got an F. Well, what did your friend do that you didn't do? What did you do that your friend didn't do? How much sleep did you get the night before? All of these things are really important elements of learning from the mistakes we make. And those low grades, that's all part of learning how to do better next time. And that's our job as teachers and parents, is to say, okay, here's this experience. What are we going to leave behind that didn't work? What are we going to take with us that did work? And let's move forward from here. How are we going to make next time different or the same as this time, depending on how it went?
And exactly what you've been referring to is it's about the process,
Right.
and not to get caught up in that. And speaking of getting caught up in that, one of the things that I know from my own experience as a parent, and also the parent coaching that I do, is that sometimes parents look at their child's grade as a status symbol almost, or
Yeah. Yeah.
their own gratification. I want to share with you. I write for Brains Magazine, and
Mhm.
my last article was about, please stop comparing your parenting with others.
Yeah.
So and so may not be in an advanced placement class. It doesn't mean they're not.
And that's not about your parenting, by the way. Stop
Yes,
equating those two things.
yes.
And it's, even if it's just a symbolic act to divorce those two things, I think it's really important. When my oldest was applying to college, I said, as a symbolic act, the one thing I will never do is put a sticker on the back of my car so that I can boast about wherever it is you end up going to college. This is too important of a decision for this to be a bragging point for me. And we carried that on with my younger kid as well. And, you know, does a sticker make a huge difference? No, but mentally to him, it made it very clear that this is not something that I get to use as a bragging point. I don't talk about where my kids go to college because it's about them. It's not about me. And it certainly is not a referendum on my parenting.
Absolutely. And you call it, in your book, you call it competitive parenting.
Yeah.
And I want to just reach out to any parent that's listening and say, the collective, we need to stop, because it only makes the other person feel like, well, maybe I'm not doing something right, and maybe my child won't get into a great college, or whatever the situation is. But it's gotten a bit ridiculous,
Yeah. And
in my mind.
the moments that I've seen this work really well is, if I'll go to a school and I'll talk about gift of failure stuff with parents and sort of get them into the right mindset to get started, where things seem to really take a turn is in the schools where they say, you know what, let's continue this conversation as parents. Let's continue to get together in the library, maybe like in a month or so, and cheer each other on. Continuing the conversation also with the educators. So every single school year when my kids were younger, I had to go to the teacher and say, look, I'm not going to be using the portal. So here's the best way to get in touch with me. I trust you to do your job. And if things start to circle the drain, here's the best way to get in touch with me. But please use my child as the main conduit of information between home and school. And again, if things start to get really bad, feel free to give me a call on my cell number or whatever, so that we can work together as a team on this. But I won't be checking the portal, because I'd rather talk to my kid and establish a relationship with my kid around that.
Excellent, excellent. Well said. And it's not just in the schools and grades that we
Mhm.
feel this competitiveness, and this, not wanting our children to fail, but sports, youth sports is a mecca for these
Yeah.
feelings of failure. And
Yeah.
in your book, you talk about how can we transform these moments of feeling like a failure to opportunities for growth and confidence. Would you share with the viewers, please? What are your thoughts about that regarding sports? And it could be anything. It could be music camp. It could
Mhm.
be, any kind of extracurricular activity.
Well, coincidentally, I wasn't a huge sports parent. I had one kid who was involved in sports, and I would go to the meets that he wanted me to go to. I even got to write a piece once about the fact that one meet that I didn't go to, someone fouled him really badly. This person should have been disqualified. If I was there, I would have made a big stink, because it would have been unfair to my child. But as it turns out, what ended up happening, this was a cross country meet, my kid who had been kicked, and he got up off the ground and his teammates fell back a little bit, pulled him forward. He ended up having one of the races of his life because he set a PR and he beat the kid who kicked him. So it was a big, huge moment for him. But I just went to, my niece is a wrestler. She's a really successful, really great young wrestler. And it was amazing to me that the behavior of some of the parents was trickling down to the kids. Most of the kids were much better behaved than their parents. And there was one parent in particular who was screaming about things that, how bad some of the girls were as wrestlers, and how they only have one trick in their bag of tricks, and how she just stinks and you can beat her. And, other parents were having to push back against that parent and say, you know what, our kids are learning from you. And what they're learning from you is to be bad sports, to not support each other and not see other female wrestlers, a sport that needs as much support as possible because there's really small numbers of girls in wrestling. And I have to say, these girls that wrestle are amazing. They support each other, and that should be more important than, your ability to stand there and scream at a young child and point out her flaws. It was a really interesting experience for me. And again, it was the parents who had the worst behavior that often had some of the kids with the worst behavior. So our kids are watching us. Honestly,
they're watching, and they watch our actions more than they listen to our words.
Far more.
For sure. So this is what we're going to do. We have some questions from our viewers. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to respond to those. I'm going to ask you to respond to those. We'll be right back.
Fantastic.
And welcome back. In the fourth segment of our show, keeping with the navigation theme of your parenting journey, we look at your questions and what can I help with the guests that we have answer to help solve your problems and to give you answers about your parenting goals. And we call this your parenting destination. And I have two questions from viewers that we're going to ask Jess Lahey, and here they are. I'm going to read them so that I get them verbatim. The first question that we have is from Cindy L. in Pasadena. And she said, I have read your wonderful book, The Gift of Failure, and want to let go of hovering over my 7th grader about her assignments. I am afraid if I let go too much that she won't receive the A's and then won't get into the high school of her choice. Please give me any advice about how to balance this. And we talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, we did. I mean, clearly you're focusing more on the process and less on the product, talking about why the learning is so important as opposed to always getting the A. The other thing that's really important to remember is, as a teacher who's written hundreds of letters of recommendation for kids, it's the kids who have really had a journey, who have really sort of tried really hard to become their own best advocate, who have tried to learn how to have the best sort of highest levels of self-efficacy, the kids who have actually gone through something that are the easiest to write letters about. So for a kid, and this sounds terrible, but for a kid who just sort of gets straight A's all along and it seems effortless and there's no real journey there, those kids are fine and they're going to do fine. The letters of recommendation aren't going to always be that interesting. But for example, there was a kid that I taught in middle school who really, really wanted to go to a certain high school. And we talked in like 7th grade, and I said, well, that's not going to happen the way things are going right now. So let's come up with a game plan for how to change that, how to kick in more effort, how to make yourself really be at the center of this learning journey, as opposed to your parents always helping out or your tutors always helping out, that kind of thing. And she ended up really just turning things around and getting so much more proactive and coming to me more often to find out how to do better. The letter I was able to write for her it was a joy to write that letter. And, as someone who also knows a lot of admissions people, both for college and for high schools, those are the letters that get kids in, not necessarily the letter of, blah, blah, blah is so reliable and always gets an A. And I have nothing really else interesting to say about this kid. They're just the old reliable. There has to be some sort of showing that a kid is just trying to be better all the time and likes to learn as opposed to just likes to get A's. So I understand the difficulty because you want those A's to be there. At the same time, we have to constantly turn this on its head. So it's not about the A's, it's about the learning process over end product.
Absolutely. And Cindy L in Pasadena, I hope that that helps. You know, the other thing, and this is just kind of an aside, and this stems from someone I'm working with actually in New York City. She said that the daughter couldn't construct a paragraph that would have been acceptable for the application for the high school. And I said, well, you know, maybe you can work with her. Obviously, we're not giving up on her. But the other part of it is maybe the high school you have in mind isn't the best match because you don't want to set kids up for failure either.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean
that's
they can
been
never get better, but if they can't write the application by themselves, the paragraph, they may have some difficulty if you can't get
yeah.
it down.
Yeah, that's a really difficult conversation too. I mean, on one hand, I try to approach it as, we act like there are only 50 or so colleges in the United States, and that's just not true. There are 2,700 accredited colleges and universities in this country, and some of them are going to be a great match for your kid, and some of them are not. And from my perspective, the ability to say, like, being in tune enough with what your kid really needs and being able to say, let's cross these schools off the list because these schools over here just aren't going to be a great match for you. It can be kind of a relief because then you get to where a kid actually will learn and grow and become in the best possible way. That's been a real trial for me. I'm very academically oriented. My husband's very academically oriented. So when it came time for our kids, yeah, there was a bit of an ego thing in there, like, ooh, where is this one on the list? But some of the top colleges in this country and top medical schools in this country are rejecting the U.S. News and World Report list for a reason, because not all kids are going to grow and thrive at just because it's a top-rated school.
Exactly. So it's about knowing your child.
Yep, there's a book called Colleges That Change Lives that I think is fantastic, even just for the idea of it. But yeah, the Colleges That Change Lives is a great starting place to think about where your kid might actually thrive, as opposed to, where they're going to give you a nice shiny sticker for the back of your car so you can feel good about yourself.
Exactly. Jess, we have one more question. We don't have a
Sure.
lot of time left, but I want to read this to you. It's from Tony S. from Syracuse. And Tony writes, my children are 13 and 15. I feel like I have been guilty of always bailing them out. Is it too late for me to try to turn things around?
No, and there's two different strategies for turning things around for little kids, but for bigger kids, the strategy that I love is the fact that these kids, relatively speaking, know how to can be reasonable, rational human beings and can reason. So if you go to your older kid and you say, you know what? I have been underestimating you. I have been doing too much for you. I've been making too many decisions for you, and I've not been giving you as many opportunities as I should to show me how competent you are and how trusted, how much I can trust you. And that changes today. And I'm really sorry. That was my fault. And I may have handicapped you along the way because I may have made things too easy for you, or maybe you haven't learned skills that you need to learn. But I'm really sorry, and we're going to do better. And I learned these things. And keep in mind, saying I learned these things and I want to do better is all we can ever ask of them. For them to realize they've made a mistake and say, you know what, I made a mistake and I'm learning from it. I'm going to do better next time. So modeling that for them and then saying, I'm here, and let's talk about like the first place where I can really back off and give you more autonomy. And sometimes that's homework, or sometimes that's, after school job, or whatever the thing is. And I talk about a few options in the book. Find a place to really step back and say, you know what, this is yours now. I'm not going to be taking responsibility for this anymore. And like I said, homework is a great place to start. And then, give them the benefit of the doubt and check in with them on a regular basis. But the first place is saying, I'm sorry, I underestimated you.
That's such a great way to put it, because it's not about, all right, hands off, I'm not doing this. You're
Mhm.
again making it a process with love and support and modeling if needed. Jess,
And in our family in particular, our default was for us not to step in. So when they did ask me to step in, I knew it was serious. I knew they really needed me in that moment, or, needed me to be present for them. And so it was a much easier way rather than my assuming they needed me all the time.
and so much more respectful to the children,
Yeah.
and their capabilities. We are just about at the end of our time. I wish we had 2 hours to continue to talk about this. But Jess, would you please take a moment and share with our viewers, how can they find you on social media? How can they find your books? Any information that you would like to share, and any closing words?
You can always find me at jessicalahey.com, and my speaking schedule is there. Come out and see me when I'm in your neck of the woods. And on top of that, I put out a daily video on TikTok and Instagram for preventing substance use in kids. I'm at like video 108 now, but at jessicalahey.com at my blog, there's a table of contents. So you can find every video. It's linked, and you can find out what every video is about.
Well, and speaking of that, the content from your second book, I have not read it yet, but it's on my list, and hopefully we'll have you back. And I'd
Thank
like to
you.
close our show today with a quote from you. And I love this quote. It's so simple, and yet it says so much. And here it is. I had to stop equating the act of doing things for my children with good parenting. It doesn't mean if you let your kids fall and you let them experience what it's like not to achieve what they want to achieve, that you're a bad parent. You're doing your job. You're being a great parent to give them that opportunity so that they can learn forever. Thank you so much, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure.